The scent of 1,000 white roses hung heavy in the air, a sweet perfume for what was meant to be the first day of forever. For Ava Montgomery, this was it, the culmination of a lifetime of dreams, standing on the precipice of becoming Mrs. Nathaniel Harrison. The 7-carat diamond on her finger was cold against her skin, a stark contrast to the warmth flooding her heart. The guests were seated. The string quartet was poised, and the man she loved more than life itself was waiting. All she had to do was walk down the aisle. But a closed door, a muffled voice, and a single whispered name were about to turn her fairy tale into a battlefield. The bridal suite at the Serenity Vineyards was a study in controlled opulent chaos. Sunlight, thick and golden, as the local Chardonnay streamed through the floor-to-ceiling French doors, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny celebratory sprites. Ava Montgomery stood before a gilded full-length mirror, a vision in ivory silk and hand-crafted lace. The dress, a bespoke creation she'd flown to Paris for, clung to her frame as if spun from moonlight and promises. Its train cascaded behind her, a magnificent waterfall of fabric that pooled on the antique Persian rug. Every detail was perfect, meticulously curated over 18 months of obsessive planning. The calla lilies in the crystal vases were the exact shade of cream she'd specified. The bridesmaids' dresses, a soft dove grey, were hanging in a neat row waiting for their occupants. A bottle of vintage champagne sat chilling in a silver bucket, its cork still caged a silent metaphor for the breathless anticipation that filled the room. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a production, the merger of two powerful families, the Montgomerys and the Harrisons, orchestrated to perfection. But for Ava, it was simpler and infinitely more profound. It was the day she was marrying Nate. She lifted a hand, her fingers trembling slightly to touch the delicate veil pinned into her intricate updo. Her reflection stared back, a woman she almost didn't recognize. The usual determined set of her jaw was softened. Her sharp blue eyes, usually focused and analytical from years in corporate strategy, were wide and glistening with unshed tears of joy. She was happy, terrifyingly, deliriously happy. "Stop fidgeting or you'll smudge your mascara, and I am not doing that winged liner again." A voice both fond and firm cut through her reverie. Ava smiled, her eyes meeting Olivia Chen's in the mirror. Liv, her maid of honor and best friend since their freshman year at Stanford, stood behind her, a fortress of calm in a sea of pre-wedding jitters. While Ava was the dreamer, Liv was the pragmatist, the one who read the fine print on every contract and every man Ava ever dated. "I can't help it," Ava breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "Is this real? Am I really about to marry Nathaniel Harrison?" Well, unless he's done a runner in the last 5 minutes. All signs point to yes, Liv said, her lips quirking into a wry smile as she adjusted a stray piece of lace on Ava's shoulder. "Though I still maintain that calling him Nathaniel sounds like you're about to scold him, not marry him." Ava laughed, a genuine bubbling sound. "I love his name. I love everything about him." She did. She loved the way Nate's eyes crinkled at the corners, when he smiled, the low rumble of his laugh that seemed to vibrate right through the ambitious fire in him that mirrored her own. He understood her in a way no one else ever had. He saw past Ava Montgomery, the heiress to the Montgomery media empire, and saw just Ava. He championed her successes, soothed her insecurities, and made her feel cherished. He was in every conceivable way her perfect match. Of course, Liv had been skeptical at first. "He's too smooth, Ava," she'd warned a year ago over cocktails. Men that charming are either selling something or hiding something. But even Liv's well-honed cynicism had eventually melted under Nate's relentless charm and his seemingly genuine adoration for Ava. He'd won over her best friend, and more importantly, he'd earned the cautious approval of her father, Robert Montgomery, a man who viewed most of his daughter's suitors as hostile takeover attempts. The door to the suite opened, and Mrs. Eleanor Harrison, Nate's mother, swept in. She was an impeccably preserved woman whose posture suggested she was constantly balancing the family's social standing on her perfectly coiffed head. "Ava, my dear, you look absolutely stunning," she said, her voice crisp. "A perfect bride for my perfect son. The photographer is ready for the pre-ceremony portraits. We are running on a very tight schedule." Everything with Eleanor was about the schedule, the appearance, the flawless execution of the event. Ava suspected her future mother-in-law viewed the wedding less as a sacred union and more as the social event of the decade, a testament to the Harrison family's enduring influence. "Of course, Eleanor. I'm almost ready," Ava said, her smile feeling a little more practiced. "Good. Nathaniel is in the study just down the hall, making a few last-minute calls. Something about the Singapore deal. That boy always working," Eleanor said with a proud sigh before turning her attention to one of the bridesmaids, who had a minuscule wrinkle in her dress. Ava's heart swelled. Even now, minutes before their wedding, Nate was closing deals securing their future. He was so driven. She felt a fresh wave of love for him. After a flurry of photos that blurred into a series of bright flashes and strained smiles, the photographer finally departed. The bridesmaids were ushered out to take their places, and Eleanor Harrison went to ensure the guests were all perfectly arranged. "Okay, 10 minutes until showtime," Liv announced, checking her watch. "How are you feeling?" "Nauseous, elated." "Want to make a run for it?" "Elated." Ava confirmed, her voice firm. I need a minute, alone, just to breathe." "You got it," Liv said, giving her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "I'll be right outside. I'll run interference on anyone who tries to come in, especially your future mother-in-law and her minute-by-minute itinerary. Take your time." Liv slipped out of the room, closing the heavy door behind her with a soft click. Ava was finally alone. The suite was suddenly blessedly quiet, the silence broken only by the frantic beating of her own heart. She walked over to the window, gazing out at the breathtaking vista of rolling hills, carpeted in rows of lush green vines. Hundreds of people were gathered below a sea of expectant faces, turned toward the flower-laden altar, where her future waited. She closed her eyes, picturing Nate's face, his handsome smile, his warm hands in hers. Forever, she thought. The word felt vast and beautiful. She just needed one quiet moment to anchor this feeling, this perfect crystalline moment in her memory, before stepping out to begin the rest of her life. The groom's study, where Nate was, shared a wall with an adjoining private anteroom. Seeking total silence, she slipped into the small book-lined space, a quiet sanctuary, away from the main suite, just to gather her thoughts in complete solitude. The anteroom was a pocket of tranquility, a stark contrast to the buzzing energy of the bridal suite. The air smelled of old leather and lemon polish. A single high-backed armchair, sat beside a small table, a space clearly designed for quiet contemplation. Ava sank into the plush velvet, the voluminous skirt of her wedding dress sighing around her. For the first time all day, she felt she could truly breathe. She closed her eyes, counting her heartbeats, trying to slow the wild, joyful gallop in her chest. 1, 2, 3, 4. The silence she had craved was suddenly broken. It wasn't loud, just a low murmur from the other side of the wall that connected to the groom's private study. Nate's voice. A soft, involuntary smile touched Ava's lips. He was still in there. She imagined him pacing the floor, handsome and impossibly dashing in his custom tuxedo, perhaps practicing his vows one last time. The thought was so endearing it made her heart ache with affection. She leaned her head back against the chair, content to just listen to the cadence of his voice, the familiar timbre that was her favorite sound in the world. But the tone was off. It wasn't the slightly nervous, excited energy she would have expected. It was low, intimate, and oddly soothing, the way one speaks when trying to calm a turbulent situation. There was an edge of something she couldn't quite place. Clandestine. Curiosity faint at first, then sharp and insistent, pricked at her. This was silly. It was probably just a last-minute call with his best man, David Carter, going over some final detail. Still, she found herself rising from the chair, her silk slippers making no sound on the thick rug. She moved toward the shared wall, drawn by an inexplicable pull. There was an old, ornate air vent cover set into the wall, a relic of the estate's original construction, and the sound was filtering through it more clearly. She hesitated for only a second before pressing her ear gently against the cool, painted wall beside it. "No, it's difficult, but you have to trust me," Nate was saying. His voice was a low caress, a velvet ribbon of sound that he had used with her 1,000 times on late-night phone calls. Just for a few more hours, everything is going exactly to plan. A plan. Ava frowned. He must be talking about the Singapore deal Eleanor had mentioned. His dedication was admirable, but couldn't it have waited until after the honeymoon? There was a pause, and Ava strained to hear the other side of the conversation, but it was impossible. He was on his phone. "Don't be like that," Nate's voice continued, and now there was a distinct note of placating tenderness that made a cold knot form in Ava's stomach. It was a tone she knew intimately, the one he used after they'd had a small disagreement, the one that melted her every time. "You know it's not like that. You can't possibly think this ceremony means anything more than a business transaction." A business transaction. The words hit her like stones. Her breath caught in her throat. He was speaking about their wedding, their marriage. He was talking to a business associate, obviously, and downplaying the emotional significance to maintain a professional, hardened exterior. Yes, that had to be it. Nate was a shark in the boardroom. He was simply in work mode. She was being ridiculous, a paranoid bride, letting her nerves get the best of her. But then he spoke again, and the next 2 words he uttered shattered her carefully constructed reality into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces. "Listen to me, Sophia." Sophia. The name was alien. It wasn't his mother, his sister, his assistant. Ava mentally scrolled through every business associate, every acquaintance, every distant cousin she had ever heard him mention. The name Sophia Russo was vaguely familiar. A senior VP at a rival firm they had briefly discussed as a potential acquisition target months ago. Why was he talking to a competitor, a woman he barely knew, with such intimacy? Minutes before their wedding, "Sophia, my love, you're the one," Nate murmured, his voice dropping even lower, thick with an emotion that was unmistakably real. This whole thing with Ava, it's a means to an end. It's the key that unlocks everything for us. You know that. We've been over this. Ava felt the blood drain from her face. The room, once a peaceful sanctuary, began to tilt violently, the bookshelves seeming to warp and bend. Her heart, which had been beating with joy just moments before, was now a frantic trapped bird slamming against her ribs. My love. He had called this other woman my love. The term of endearment, his special name for Ava, felt like acid on her skin. She wanted to pull away, to run from the room, to unhear the words that were branding themselves onto her soul. But she was frozen, pinned to the spot by a horrifying magnetic force. She had to know. She had to hear the rest of the lie that had been her life. Leaning against the wall, Ava felt the cold plaster seep through the delicate lace of her dress, a chilling premonition of the ice that was rapidly encasing her heart. The world had narrowed to this one single point, the sound of her fiancé's voice weaving a tapestry of betrayal through the thin partition. Every word was a thread, pulling taut, strangling the beautiful picture of the life she thought they were building together. Of course she's beautiful. Nate was saying, a dismissive, almost clinical assessment that made Ava's stomach clench. And smart. That's what makes her the perfect front. Robert Montgomery adores her. He wouldn't sign over proxy control of his media shares to just anyone's husband. He's doing it for her. He thinks he's securing his little girl's future with a man who loves her. A wave of nausea washed over Ava so powerfully she had to press a hand to her mouth. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a calculated long con, a corporate raid disguised as a romance. Her father. He was using her love for him to get to her father, to gain control of the company her grandfather had built from the ground up. The prenuptial agreement, which she had thought was a standard formality, now loomed in her mind as a sinister document. She remembered Nate being the one to suggest a clause, an unusual one, about merging certain voting rights in their respective family companies to show a united front. Her father's lawyers had questioned it, but Nate, with his easy charm, had convinced everyone it was a gesture of ultimate trust. It wasn't trust, it was a Trojan horse. No, don't cry, baby. Please don't cry. Nate soothed into the phone, and the false tenderness in his voice was grotesque. Nothing changes between us. This is just a piece of paper, a performance. Think of it as the most lucrative acting job of our lives. Once the merger is complete and the Montgomery assets are leveraged into our new venture, I'll initiate the exit strategy. A quiet, amicable divorce in a year or two, citing irreconcilable differences. By then it will be too late for them to undo the financial ties. A year or two. He had their entire sham marriage and its demolition planned out. He spoke of it with the same dispassionate strategy he would use to describe a stock portfolio. He would live with her, sleep with her, pretend to love her for up to 2 years, all while his heart belonged to this Sophia, and his ambition belonged to her family's legacy. Ava thought back to their entire relationship. The whirlwind romance, the grand gestures, the perfectly timed declarations of love. Had any of it been real? The trip to Tuscany, where he'd proposed at sunset. Was he thinking of Sophia then? The nights he held her and whispered about their future. Their children. Was it all a meticulously rehearsed script? A cold, horrifying clarity washed over her. She saw it all now, the way he'd subtly steered conversations toward her father's business dealings, his casual interest in the company's Q3 earnings, the way he'd seamlessly integrated himself into every facet of her personal and professional life. He wasn't a partner. he was an infiltrator. "I have to go," Nate said, his voice becoming slightly more hurried. "The music is about to start. My best man is probably having a seizure wondering where I am. Just be patient. I'll see you tonight." A choked, strangled sound escaped Ava's lips. Tonight, he was going to leave his own wedding reception to meet his mistress. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. "Yes, tonight," Nate confirmed, as if answering her silent, horrified scream. "Our usual place. Around midnight. I'll tell Ava I have to take a conference call with the Tokyo office. She'll buy it. She buys everything." The final sentence was the killing blow. It was laced with a casual contempt, a smug superiority that revealed the true depth of his deception. He didn't just betray her. He didn't respect her. He saw her as a naive, gullible pawn in his elaborate game. The love she felt, the trust she had given him so freely, was in his eyes a weakness to be exploited. "I love you, Sophia," he murmured the final 3 words, a death sentence for the life Ava had been about to embrace. "Only you. Always." Ava stumbled back from the wall, her hand flying to her chest as if to physically hold her heart together. The room was spinning faster now, the edges blurring into a grey haze. The beautiful, expensive dress felt like a shroud. The 7-carat diamond on her finger felt as heavy and as cold as a tombstone. The joyous music that had begun to drift in from the courtyard, the soft, hopeful notes of the string quartet signaling the start of the ceremony, sounded like a funeral dirge. Her wedding day, the day her life was supposed to begin. It was instead the day she learned it had all been a lie. For a long, silent moment, Ava could do nothing but stand in the center of the anteroom, her body rigid with shock. The air she drew into her lungs felt thin and useless, offering no oxygen to her suffocating brain. The world outside the small room, the guests, the music, the man waiting at the altar, seemed to be happening in a different dimension, a distant, muffled reality she was no longer a part of. Her own reality had collapsed inward, leaving nothing but the ringing echo of Nate's words. She buys everything. A violent tremor started in her hands and spread through her entire body. She looked down at her left hand, at the magnificent diamond Nate had placed there. It wasn't a symbol of love. It was a retainer for a service, the price for her family's company. She clawed at the ring, her fingers fumbling desperate to get it off, but her knuckles were swollen from the stress and it wouldn't budge. A strangled sob of frustration and despair tore from her throat. The scent of the white roses she carried in her bouquet, now resting on the small table, was suddenly cloying and nauseating. The perfume of a lie. The whole day was a lie. The dress was a costume for a fool. The vows they had written together were a work of fiction. Her love, the vast, all-consuming love she had felt for Nate, was a phantom emotion wasted on a man who didn't exist. The man she loved was a carefully constructed character, and the real Nathaniel Harrison was a monster. The door creaked open, and Liv poked her head in. "Everything okay in here?" The music started. "Your dad is waiting just outside the suite. It's go time." Liv's cheerful expression dissolved the instant she saw Ava's face. The blood had drained from it, leaving behind a stark, bone-white canvas of horror. Ava's eyes were wide and vacant, her makeup a perfect tragic mask that couldn't conceal the utter devastation beneath. "Ava, what is it?" "What's wrong?" Liv asked, rushing to her side and grabbing her arms. Ava's whole body was trembling. "My God, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," Ava whispered, her voice a dry, rasping sound that was barely human. I heard one. She couldn't form a coherent sentence. The words were log-jammed behind the lump of grief in her throat. She could only point a shaking finger toward the wall that separated her from the man who had just annihilated her world. "Nate," she choked out. "He was on the phone, in the study." Liv's eyes narrowed, her protective instincts flaring. What about him? Is he calling it off? That cowardly son of a... No! Ava cut her off, a single hysterical laugh escaping her lips. It was a terrible sound, sharp and broken. He's not calling it off. It's a performance. The most lucrative acting job of our lives. Piece by agonizing piece in halting, fractured sentences, Ava relayed the conversation she had overheard. She repeated the name Sophia. She detailed the cold corporate language he used to describe their marriage. She explained the plot against her father, the leveraging of the Montgomery assets, the planned exit strategy of a divorce in 2 years. With every word she spoke, the reality became more solid, more undeniable. Saying it out loud made it real. Liv listened, her face transforming from confusion to disbelief, and finally to a cold, concentrated fury that was terrifying to behold. The blood drained from her face, mirroring Ava's, but her eyes burned with a righteous fire. All her initial doubts, all the subtle red flags she had brushed aside for Ava's sake, came roaring back. "I knew it," Liv hissed, her voice low and venomous. "I knew there was something off about him. The way he looked at your father's portfolio, the questions he asked. I told myself I was being paranoid." She squeezed Ava's arms, her grip grounding. "That manipulative, parasitic snake. I will kill him. I will walk out there and end him right now." "It's too late," Ava murmured, her gaze distant. "The ceremony is starting. Everyone is waiting." The sheer momentum of the day felt unstoppable, a freight train heading for a cliff. "Then we stop it," Liv insisted, her voice rising with urgency. "We walk out there right now and tell your dad. We call the whole thing off. Humiliate him in front of all those people. Let him explain this to Eleanor and her perfect schedule." The thought of walking away, of running and hiding, was tempting. She could dissolve into a puddle of tears. Let Liv handle it, and wake up tomorrow to deal with the fallout. But then Nate's final words echoed in her ears. She buys everything. The smugness, the contempt. He saw her as weak a fool to be played. If she ran away crying, she would be proving him right. He would spin a story, paint her as an unstable runaway bride, and perhaps even salvage his reputation. He would win. A new feeling began to stir beneath the crushing weight of her grief. It was small at first, a tiny ember in the ashes of her heart. But as she looked at her own reflection in the darkened window pane, a woman in a white dress, shattered but not yet broken, that ember began to glow. It was rage. A pure, court-clarifying rage. He was not going to win. He was not going to destroy her family and walk away unscathed. She would not be the victim in his story. She would be the reckoning. "No," Ava said, her voice suddenly steady, infused with a chilling calm. "We're not stopping it. I'm not running." She straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin. Her eyes, when she met Liv's in the mirror, were no longer vacant. They were blazing. "I'm walking down that aisle." Liv stared at her, utterly bewildered. "What Ava know? Are you crazy? You can't marry him. You can't stand up there and say vows to that monster." "I'm not going to marry him," Ava said, her voice as sharp and cold as breaking ice. I'm going to expose him. The shock that had paralyzed her moments ago had receded, replaced by a preternatural clarity. The grief was still there, a massive, gaping wound in her chest, but her mind was now working with the ruthless efficiency of the top-tier strategist she was. Nate had mistaken her love for foolishness. He had mistaken her trust for blindness. He was about to find out how devastatingly wrong he was. He wants a performance. Ava's lips twisted into a bitter, mirthless smile. I'll give him the performance of a lifetime, in front of our 500 closest friends, family and business associates, in front of my father, in front of his mother. Understanding dawned on Liv's face, followed by a slow, wolfish grin. Oh, you magnificent woman. What's the plan? I need proof, Ava said, her mind racing. It can't just be my word against his. He'll deny everything. He'll call me hysterical, say I have pre-wedding jitters. His mother will back him up. I need something concrete. His phone, Liv said instantly. He was just on it. It has to be in the study. David Carter is in there with him, Ava countered. We can't just walk in. Then I'll create a diversion, Liv said, already moving toward the door. I'll tell David that Eleanor is having a meltdown about the floral arrangements at the main entrance and needs his immediate assistance. She's always having a meltdown about something he won't question it. That should give me a minute, maybe 2. What are you looking for? Call logs, text messages with this Sophia. Anything. Liv's eyes darted around the room, a plan forming. Nate is arrogant. He probably thinks he's untouchable. He might not have even deleted it yet. It's too risky, Liv. If you get caught, the only risk is letting him get away with this. Liv cut in her expression fierce. While I do that, you need to do something for me. Get your father, now. Ava nodded, her resolve hardening. The music is getting louder. We don't have much time. Go. Use the connecting door from the main suite to the hallway. No one will see you. Tell your father there's an emergency with the dress, anything. Just get him to this room, and don't let him leave. I'll meet you back here. With a final determined look, Liv slipped out of the anteroom. Ava took one last deep breath, composing her face into a mask of placid concern. She walked back into the bridal suite, which was now empty, and opened the main door to the grand hallway. Her father, Robert Montgomery, stood there looking regal and proud in his tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. His warm smile was the kindest thing she had ever seen, and the sight of it so full of love and pride for her almost broke her. There you are, my darling, he said, holding out his arm. Ready to take the longest, most important walk of your life. Almost, Dad, Ava said, forcing her voice to remain even. There's a small tear in the lace on the back of my dress. Liv is trying to find a pin. Could you come into the anteroom for a second? I don't want anyone else to see. Robert's smile faltered slightly, replaced by concern. Of course, sweetheart. Anything you need. She led him past the empty bridal suite and into the small, quiet anteroom where her world had ended just minutes before. She closed the door firmly behind them. Ava, what is this? Her father asked, his brow furrowed as he looked around the small room. Where's the tear? Ava turned to face him, letting the mask of composure fall away. Her father saw the raw anguish in her eyes, and his entire demeanor changed. The celebratory father vanished, replaced by the shrewd, protective CEO who could spot a threat a mile away. The wedding is off, Ava stated, her voice shaking but clear. What? What happened? Did he do something to you? Robert's hands were already balling into fists. Concisely, and with a chilling lack of emotion that scared even herself, she told him everything. She left out the heartbreak, the personal betrayal, and focused on the facts that he, as a businessman, would immediately grasp. Nate is marrying me to gain proxy control of your shares. It's a corporate takeover plot, orchestrated with a woman named Sophia Russo. He plans to leverage our assets, merge them into a new company, and then divorce me in under 2 years. Robert Montgomery went pale. He sank into the armchair Ava had occupied earlier, looking as though he'd been physically struck. For a moment he was silent, processing the sheer scale of the deception. It wasn't just his daughter's heart. It was his life's work, his family's legacy that had been targeted. His expression shifted from shock to a glacial, terrifying rage that made the air in the room grow cold. "That young man," he began, his voice a low growl, "is about to learn what it truly means to cross a Montgomery." Just then the door opened silently, and Liv slipped back into the room, her face pale, but her eyes triumphant. She was holding her small, jeweled clutch. "Did you get it?" Ava breathed. "Better." Liv whispered, her voice trembling with adrenaline. "His laptop. It was open on his desk. He has a program that auto-records his business calls for quality assurance. He must have forgotten to turn it off." She opened her clutch and pulled out a tiny USB drive. "I have the entire 10-minute conversation, every single word." Ava looked from the USB drive in Liv's hand to the burning fury in her father's eyes. The final piece of her plan had just clicked into place. The string quartet outside swelled, playing the opening bars of the bridal march. It was time. Robert stood up, his back ramrod straight. He looked at his daughter, his eyes filled with a mixture of immense pain for her and boundless pride. He held out his arm. "It seems, my darling," he said, his voice grim but resolute, "that we still have a walk to take." Walking down the aisle on her father's arm was a surreal, out-of-body experience. The faces of the guests turned towards her, a sea of beaming smiles and happy tears. They saw a radiant bride, the picture of perfection gliding toward her happily ever after. They didn't see the war council that had taken place just moments before, nor could they feel the Arctic chill emanating from the bride and her father. Ava held her head high, her bouquet of white roses clutched in a grip so tight her knuckles were white. Her steps were measured and deliberate, not the hesitant steps of a nervous bride, but the determined march of a soldier. Her gaze was fixed on the end of the aisle, on the man standing under a magnificent archway of flowers. Nathaniel Harrison. He was even more handsome than she had remembered his smile, broad and confident. As she drew closer, she saw the look in his eyes, a mixture of adoration and triumphant possession. He thought he had won. He was looking at his grand prize, his beautiful, unsuspecting key to a dynasty. The sight of it fueled the fire of her rage, burning away the last vestiges of her tears. Her father's hand was a rock on her arm. He leaned in his whisper for her ears alone. "I am so proud of you, Ava. Let him have it." When they reached the altar, Robert didn't just give her hand to Nate. He placed it there with a pointed formality, his eyes locking with Nate's, for a fraction of a second too long, a silent promise of retribution. Nate, oblivious, beamed at her. "You look breathtaking," he whispered, his voice full of the false warmth that had once been her entire world. "I'm the luckiest man alive." "You have no idea," Ava replied, her voice soft, her smile a chillingly perfect imitation of a happy bride's. His smile faltered for a second, confused by her tone, but the officiant began to speak, and the moment passed. The ceremony began. The words washed over Ava, meaningless platitudes about love, trust, and forever. She stood perfectly still, a marble statue of a bride, her eyes never leaving Nate's face. He seemed to sense a shift in the atmosphere, his confident smile tightening at the edges as he met her unblinking, icy stare. He fidgeted with his cuffs, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. They moved through the opening remarks and the readings. Then came the moment. The officiant smiled benevolently. Before these two are joined in matrimony, if there is anyone present who has just cause to believe they should not be wed, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. A traditional theatrical pause. The guests shuffled a few, coughed politely. In the silence, Ava, who was supposed to be the picture of silent acquiescence, took a small, deliberate step forward and raised her hand. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. It started as a murmur and grew into a wave of shocked whispers. Nate's face froze, the blood draining from it, his mask of the charming groom cracking into a million pieces. His mother, Eleanor, in the front row, looked as if she had been slapped. "Ava, what are you doing?" Nate hissed his voice, a panicked whisper, grabbing for her hand. She pulled it away, as if his touch were poison. She turned to the stunned officiant. "I believe I have just cause," she said, her voice ringing out, clear and steady, amplified by the small microphone clipped to his lapel. The technicians, assuming a planned modern twist to the ceremony, had turned it on. Every person in the vineyard could hear her perfectly. She turned her body slightly, addressing not just Nate, but the entire assembly. "I'd like to thank you all for coming today to celebrate this union. A union I, until about 20 minutes ago, believed was based on love and mutual respect. However, I've just been made privy to some new information that has rather altered the terms of the agreement." She saw her father nod grimly from his seat. She saw Liv standing beside the other bridesmaids, her expression one of righteous vindication. Ava's eyes found Nate's again. His were wide with dawning horror and disbelief. "You see," she continued, her voice dripping with scorn, "I always thought my fiancé's pet name for me was my love. A little unoriginal, perhaps, but I cherished it. Imagine my surprise when I learned just before walking down this aisle that he reserves that same term of endearment for another woman, a woman named Sophia Russo." The name hung in the air. Nate flinched as if he'd been shot. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "But simple infidelity I might have been able to forgive," Ava went on, her voice rising in power. "What I find a little harder to overlook is the reason for this wedding. Nate called it a business transaction, a means to an end, the most lucrative acting job of our lives. His words, not mine." She took a step closer to him, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that the microphone carried to every corner of the stunned audience. The plan was quite brilliant, really. Marry the loving, trusting daughter to gain proxy control of her father's company. Leverage the Montgomery media assets, secure your future, and then file for a quiet divorce in a year or two. And all the while you'd be seeing Sophia. You even had a date planned for tonight, your usual place, midnight. After you'd lied to your new wife about a conference call with Tokyo. Nate finally found his voice. "She's hysterical," he stammered, looking wildly at the crowd, then at his mother. She's got pre-wedding jitters. She's not well." Eleanor Harrison started to rise from her seat, her face a mask of fury and humiliation, ready to defend her son and salvage the situation. But before she could speak, Liv stepped forward from the bridal party line. She held up her phone, which was connected to a small portable speaker on the officiant's lectern. "Is this your voice, Nate?" Liv asked, her tone deadly. She pressed play, and into the stunned silence of the Napa Valley afternoon, Nate's own voice filled the air, smooth and conspiratorial. "This whole thing with Ava, it's a means to an end. It's the key that unlocks everything for us. I love you, Sophia. Only you. Always." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute and damning. The silence was shattered by a cacophony of gasps, angry murmurs, and the frantic clicking of phones as guests began to realize they were witnessing the most scandalous event of the decade. Nate stood frozen at the altar, his face a ghastly shade of pale, exposed, and utterly defeated. The recording of his own voice, his own intimate betrayal, was undeniable proof. The charm, the confidence, the carefully constructed facade had been stripped away, leaving behind a common, pathetic cheat. He looked desperately toward his mother, but Eleanor Harrison was no longer looking at him with maternal pride. Her face was a storm of public humiliation. Her son hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been caught. He had turned the Harrison name into a laughingstock in front of the very society she had spent her life cultivating. Her horror was not for his soul, but for her status. Robert Montgomery rose from his seat in the front row, his presence commanding immediate attention. He didn't look at Nate. He addressed the assembled guests, his voice resonating with the authority of a man who had built an empire. "As of this moment," he announced, his words sharp and final, "Montgomery Media and all of its affiliates are severing any and all ties, both present and future, with Harrison Industries. Any joint ventures are hereby terminated. Our legal team will be in contact." Each sentence was a hammer blow, publicly and professionally dismantling the Harrison family's ambitions. It was a corporate execution performed in broad daylight. Nate finally looked at Ava, a desperate, pleading expression on his face. "Ava, please, we can talk about this. Don't do this." Ava looked at the man she had almost married, and for the first time she felt nothing. No love, no hate, not even pity. There was just a vast, empty space where her feelings for him used to be. He was a stranger, a failed business proposition. She slowly began to pull off her white silk gloves. Then, with a strength she didn't know she possessed, she twisted the 7-carat diamond ring on her finger. It finally came loose. She held it up, letting it catch the afternoon light, a glittering symbol of a toxic lie. She looked him directly in the eye. "My father's company. My family's legacy, my trust. You thought this was the price for all of it?" She said, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of her conviction. She opened her palm and let the ring drop. It hit the stone steps of the altar with a small, definitive clink, a sound of finality that echoed through the vineyard. "You're not wealthy enough to afford my heart." Without another word, without a single backward glance, Ava turned. She gathered the skirt of her magnificent dress, the one she had chosen for a life that no longer existed, and she began to walk. Not run. Walk. Back down the aisle she had just ascended. This time the faces of the guests were a blur of shock, awe, and for many deep respect. She wasn't a jilted bride fleeing in shame. She was a queen, abdicating a corrupt throne, her head held high, her back straight. She had walked into this ceremony a naive girl in love, and she was walking out a woman who had saved herself and her family. Her father and Liv fell into step on either side of her as she reached the end of the aisle. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They simply formed a protective wall around her, their presence a silent testament to the love that was real and enduring. As she stepped out from under the shade of the wedding canopy and into the bright, unfiltered sunlight, Ava took her first deep breath of clean air. The scent of roses no longer seemed cloying. It was just the smell of a beautiful day, the first day of her new unwritten future. The path ahead was uncertain, and the wound of betrayal was deep, but for the first time in a very long time, she was free. The wedding was over. Her life was just beginning. The walk away from the altar was the longest and shortest of Ava's life. Each step was a deliberate severing of a tie to the past. The cacophony behind them, the shocked shouts, the panicked voice of Eleanor Harrison, trying to assert control, its pathetic, fading cries of her name, melded into a meaningless roar, the sound of a distant, collapsing city that was no longer her problem. She didn't look back. To look back would be to acknowledge the ruins, and right now all she could do was focus on putting one foot in front of the other. Robert Montgomery guided them with a firm hand on her back, his other arm protectively around Liv, steering them away from the main courtyard and toward the private villa reserved for the family on the far side of the estate. Their footsteps crunched on the gravel path, a stark, rhythmic sound against the chaos they were leaving in their wake. A few of the estate's security staff, alerted by Robert, with a single sharp gesture materialized around them, forming a silent, unbreachable perimeter. They were a small, tight unit, moving through a war zone of their own making. The moment the heavy oak door of the villa clicked shut behind them, the world went silent. The soundproofed walls blocked out the pandemonium, leaving only the sound of their own ragged breathing. For a second, the three of them just stood there in the opulent foyer, the adrenaline of the confrontation draining away, leaving a hollow, buzzing vacuum in its place. And then Ava's body remembered the pain her mind had been holding at bay. A tremor started in her knees, traveling up her body until her teeth were chattering. The magnificent wedding dress, which had felt like armor just moments ago, now felt like a leaden cage. The corset, once a symbol of bridal elegance, was a vice squeezing the air from her lungs. She looked down at her hands, no longer clutching the bouquet, and saw them shaking uncontrollably. The strength that had carried her down the aisle, the cold fury that had fueled her speech, evaporated. All that was left was the girl who had been utterly devastatingly betrayed. I can't breathe," she whispered, her hands clawing at the intricate pearl buttons running down her back. Liv was on her in an instant. Okay, we're getting it off. Dad, give us a minute." Robert, who had already pulled out his phone, his face set like granite, gave a single pained nod and retreated to the far end of the living room, his back to them. He began speaking in low, lethal tones, his voice a weapon being deployed against the Harrison family. "Get our legal team on a conference call. Now! I want a full injunction against Harrison Industries by morning, and get me our head of PR. No, I don't care that it's a Saturday." Liv's fingers, nimble and sure, worked at the impossible buttons. "Just breathe, Ava. In and out. That's it. We're almost there." One by one, the buttons came undone, and with each release, a wave of despair washed over Ava. It was as if the dress had been holding her together and now she was coming apart at the seams. As Liv finally pulled the heavy silk and lace from her shoulders, letting it pool in a heap on the floor like a fallen cloud, Ava's legs gave out. She collapsed onto a velvet settee, a raw, guttural sob tearing from her throat. It wasn't a cry of anger. It was a sound of profound loss. She wasn't just crying for Nate the liar and the cheat. She was crying for the man she thought he was. She wept for the happy memories, now tainted and grotesque in their falsehood. She wept for the future she had so meticulously planned, the home they were going to build the children she had imagined with his smile. She was mourning a death, the death of a dream, and the death of the woman she had been when she woke up that morning so full of hope and love. Liv knelt before her, gathering her into her arms. She didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. She just held her, letting Ava soak the shoulder of her dove-grey bridesmaid dress, with tears providing a steady, silent anchor in the storm of her grief. After what felt like an eternity, the sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. Ava pulled back, her face blotchy, her eyes raw. "He never loved me," she whispered, the simple, devastating truth of it hanging in the air. "None of it was real." "The love you felt was real, Ava," Liv said fiercely, her hands framing Ava's face. "Your heart, your trust, your hope, that was all genuine. He was the fake. He was the empty one. Don't you ever let him poison what is good and true inside of you." From across the room, Robert ended his call. He walked over, his expression softened with a father's pain. He knelt beside Liv, taking Ava's trembling hand in his own. "Security is escorting the Harrisons off the property. The guests are being informed of a sudden family emergency. Our team is handling the media. You don't have to worry about any of it." He squeezed her hand. "You were magnificent, Ava. You were a warrior." "I don't feel like a warrior," she whispered, looking at the heap of ivory silk on the floor. "I just feel broken." "You have been broken open," her father corrected gently. "And you will heal, and you will be stronger than you ever were before." He looked from his daughter to her best friend, his eyes full of gratitude. "Both of you will." A fragile sense of peace began to settle in the room. The worst was over. The lie was exposed. The performance was done. Ava looked at the two faces before her, her fiercely loyal friend and her unshakable father. This was real. This love, this support, was the fortune Nate had never been clever enough to see. She had lost a fiancé, a future, a fantasy. But she hadn't lost everything. She hadn't even lost the most important things. They were right here, kneeling with her in the ruins. What Ava did that day wasn't just about revenge. It was a profound act of reclaiming her own story. In the face of devastating betrayal, she refused to be the victim. She chose strength over sorrow, truth over tradition, and her own self-worth over a hollow fairy tale. Her walk back down that aisle wasn't an escape. It was a coronation. She crowned herself the ruler of her own destiny. We all face moments where our world is shaken, where the people we trust reveal themselves to be someone else entirely. The question is, what do we do next? Do we crumble, or do we rise from the ashes, stronger and wiser? What would you have done in Ava's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've ever had to find strength in the middle of a storm, we want to hear your story. Your journey could be the inspiration someone else needs to hear today. Thank you for listening, and if this story moved you, please give it a like. Share it with someone who needs a story of resilience, and subscribe for more real-life drama.